Medieval warfare was shaped not only by the courage of knights and the discipline of armies, but also by the brutal creativity behind the weapons they carried. Far from the polished image of shining swords and noble duels, the Middle Ages produced tools designed to shock, maim, and terrify both soldiers and civilians. Some were adapted from everyday implements, others engineered with precision for siege or battlefield dominance, but all shared one purpose: to break the enemy's will as much as his body. These weapons reveal a darker side of history, where necessity, desperation, and ingenuity combine to create instruments that still unsettle us centuries later. Number 1. The man-catcher. A man-catcher was a purpose-built capture polearm, designed to end a fight without a sword stroke, and its design shows exactly what worried late medieval and early modern authorities: armored men on horseback, violent suspects in tight streets, and the need to control them at a distance. The head was usually 2 half rings on a pivot that formed a collar when pushed over a target's neck, arm, or torso. Many examples have spring doors that let the body pass one way, but lock shut when you try to back out, and some add inward-pointing barbs to punish resistance. The long shaft kept the user outside dagger range, while leverage did the work, letting a guard wrench a rider from the saddle or pin a struggling person to a wall or the ground. Unlike spears or bills, the man-catcher wasn't built to pierce plate. Its most effective targets actually wore armor, which protected skin from the metal edges, while the collar trapped the body. In city service, a watchman could hook an arm instead of the throat to avoid crushing the windpipe. During cavalry control, the trick was to catch above the gorget or under the bavor, and drive the pole downward to unseat the horseman. Museums preserve rare but telling specimens: German and Dutch heads with locking prongs, some with circular collars lined by spikes, mounted on poles 2 to 3 meters long enough reach to manage a mounted knight at a gate, or force a prisoner through a crowd. The context explains why such a tool existed. In many European towns, ransoms, due process, and public order mattered. Killing a noble or a valuable captive could be costly, but letting an armed offender close the distance was deadly. A man-catcher gave small groups of guards a way to subdue someone bigger, better armored, or mounted, and to do it while other staff weapons held the perimeter. That practicality also made it frightening. It turned a confident fighter into cargo, depriving him of balance, breath, and agency while onlookers watched. It is sometimes described as non-lethal, but that label is modern and optimistic. On an unarmored neck, barbs and pressure could maim. A thrown rider could break a collarbone or worse, and any panicked jerk against a locked collar made injuries more likely. Surviving heads show different philosophies of restraint. Some favor smooth half-moons with spring latches that trap but minimize cutting. Others use tooth-like barbs to discourage all movement. Written labels and collection notes put most extant European examples in the 16th-18th centuries, which matches how cities professionalized policing and how battlefield priorities shifted from massed nightly charges toward firearms and formal arrests. The tool's reputation as a medieval horror persists because it fits late medieval problems-armored elites, ransom economies, gate security, even if the hardware we can point to comes mostly from the period when those problems were being solved in new ways. Cross-culturally, the idea is not unique. Japan's Edo period Sasumata was a padded forked pole for arrests, but European man-catchers remained harsher and spike-forward. What makes the man-catcher truly terrifying is not gore or spectacle. It is the knowledge that it transforms the most dangerous person on the street into a helpless, hauled-about prisoner, and that a single well-timed thrust could decide a fight without a blade being drawn. Number 2. The Scorpion Ballista. The Scorpion, known to Romans as the Scorpio, was a compact torsion bolt thrower that sat between a handheld crossbow and a full siege engine, built to deliver fast, accurate shots that disrupted officers, standard-bearers, and tightly packed assault teams, rather than to smash walls. Its power came from 2 short arms set in twisted skeins of sinew or hair. When the winch drew back the slider, energy stored in the torsion bundles launched a yard-long bolt from a wooden bed with startling speed. Manuals and archaeological notes describe crews ranging from a single expert to a small team managing the winding gear, the ammunition, and the aiming, which was done with the help of sights carved into the stock. Because the Scorpion was lighter than stone throwers, armies could wheel it onto ramparts, mount it in gatehouses, or push it forward under mantlets to sweep approaches. Later, medieval defenders revived the concept in the springald, a torsion box crossbow set inside a timber frame with inward swinging arms that made it easier to house on walls and behind arrow slits. In practice, commanders used these engines as precision tools: pick off an engineer placing a mine, pierce a pavis at a breach, break a ladder party before it reached the parapet, or clear a causeway long enough for a countercharge. Reconstructed and instrumented trials suggest that properly tuned bolt shooters could punch through shields and leather or mail, and at closer ranges threaten early plate where seams and joints offered a path. Rate of fire depended on crew drill, but a trained team could keep up a steady cadence that made exposed work near walls dangerous. The torsion system mattered for another reason. Unlike a bow prod, skeins retain energy in compact bundles, so the machine could be built narrow enough to sit behind embrasures and still deliver hard, flat trajectories with less arc than a longbow over comparable tactical distances. Medieval chroniclers and civic records place springalds on major gates and towers in German and Italian cities, often under roofs to protect the skeins from moisture. The role was defensive first, buying time and space during a siege and punishing any attempt to rush a choke point. Compared to catapults and trebuchets, the Scorpion family was cheaper in timber and counterweight and far more economical in ammunition. Bolts could be made in quantity and carried upstairs. Yet the cost was constant maintenance. Skeins needed careful humidity control, and the frame had to be kept square or accuracy degraded quickly. By the late 14th century, gunpowder artillery began to displace these engines because powder did not suffer from damp sinew and delivered shock effects that torsion could not match. But the tactical idea persisted. Accurate, aimed fire that strips leadership and specialists is a force multiplier, whether it leaves the rail of a Scorpion or the barrel of a handgun. That is why the Scorpion ballista, or its medieval springald descendant, deserves its place among the most unsettling weapons of the era. Not for spectacle, but for the quiet, repeatable way it made the most exposed jobs on a medieval battlefield suddenly lethal. Number 3. The fire lance. Emerging in China between the 10th and 12th centuries, the fire lance began as a spear with a bamboo tube lashed near the head and filled with a fast-burning gunpowder charge. When the match reached the tube, it vented a jet of flame and sparks, and as powders improved, craftsmen mixed in hard debris, porcelain shards, or iron pellets. So the blast carried wounding fragments, along with heat and smoke over only a few meters, but with shocking effect. In battlefield use during the Jinsong Wars, its value was never wall-breaking power, but sudden disruption. A guard at a breach or a cart team defending a siege engine could fire once to blind, scorch, and scatter, then close with the spear, or step back while archers exploited the shock. Contemporary and later technical texts, as well as modern reconstructions, agree on the profile. Very short effective range, usually on the order of a few paces. One shot unless a second tube was pre-attached, and a violent report that spooked horses and men in tight formations. As the tactical niche matured, makers lengthened the tubes, refined mixtures, and sometimes omitted the spearhead entirely to maximize the blast. By the mid-13th century, metal tubes replaced bamboo to withstand higher pressures, and some double lances fired sequentially innovations preserved in illustrated treatises that also codified recipes and handling. The weapon's terror came from the combination of sensory overload and tactical timing. Flame and smoke-masked movement, pellets punched through light armor and faces behind shields, and the roar announced a new threat that arrows could not imitate. Yet its limitations were real, and explain its evolution into true guns. Humidity degraded early powders and the organic skeins of matches. Bamboo tubes could char or burst. And the one-shot cycle punished any user who mistimed the ignition, especially on open ground where a countercharge could arrive before a reload. Administrators and engineers treated it as part of a combined system mounted to at-your-desire war carts, issued to gate guards, or bundled with other incendiaries, because it multiplied the effectiveness of familiar tactics like night sorties and ladder defense rather than replacing them. Sources from the 1130s onward record it in siege fighting, and by the 1230s, the vocabulary of fire tube overlaps with early hand cannon, a sign that the same operational need close-range shock that pierces morale and armor was pushing designers from expendable bamboo to durable metal barrels. By the late 13th century, hand cannons that owed their silhouette to the lance appear in the archaeological record, while treatises of the 14th century preserve drawings of multi-barreled lances and precise formulations of powder, confirming a transition already underway on the ground. The fire lance is terrifying, not because it dominated alone, but because it marks the moment when fire, sound, and fragments unleashed from a tube in a soldier's hands began to rewrite the logic of medieval combat, forcing every familiar drill at a breach or gateway to account for a blast measured in seconds, yet decisive for the fight. Number 4. The war scythe. Born from a practical need rather than chivalric fashion, the war scythe sits at the awkward edge where rural labor, emergency armament, and evolving infantry doctrine meet, which is why it unnerves even seasoned reenactors. It breaks the neat categories of knightly weapons and shows how quickly crowds could become credible fighting bodies. At its core were two lineages that often get conflated. One was the true, purpose-built polearm, with a scythe-like, inward-edged blade mounted along the line of the shaft closer to fauchards and other curved pole blades than to farm gear, sometimes with a reinforcing spine and langets to protect the wooden haft. The other was the improvised, rehafted field scythe of uprisings. Its blade rotated forward so the cutting edge faced the enemy, socketed or strapped to a straight pole, and sometimes braced with iron collars. That conversion sacrificed mowing geometry for reach, leverage, and the ability to hook or hew at men and horses. Museums and inventories show both types in circulation across the late medieval and early modern centuries. A late 15th century scythe-like polearm in a national collection points to deliberate martial design, while post-medieval Tower of London lists and surviving pieces tied to the 1685 Sedgemoor campaign confirm batches of axially mounted scythe blades pressed into service for rebel militias. On the ground, the weapon's terror came less from spectacular killing power than from how it let poorly equipped infantry participate in the combined arms problem that defined late medieval warfare. In close order behind stakes, carts, or shallow ditches, long hafted scythes presented a dense thicket of steel that discouraged cavalry, punished ladder parties, and gave levy formations a workable answer to armored men. Hussite wagenlagers made this logic visible. Even where flails and handguns drew the headlines, curved pole blades, whether purpose-made or adapted fit, neatly into the defensive geometry of rails, gaps, and kill zones. In peasant revolts of the 1520s, scythe-armed bands learned the same lesson under harsher conditions. A tool that could be built fast, repaired locally, and used with minimal drill mattered more than parade perfection. The Polish scythemen, who became emblematic in later iconography, proved the other side of the curve. Once authorities or insurgent leaders organized, the improvised mount could be standardized, drilled in files, and used for coordinated pushes at guns or along hedgerows, especially where terrain compressed cavalry. None of this made the war scythe a wonder weapon. Its weaknesses are obvious to anyone who has swung one flex in long wooden shafts, edge durability against plate, and a reliance on formation discipline to keep the heads aligned rather than colliding. But those limits are exactly what explain its persistence. Commanders valued a polearm that villages could assemble by the dozen, that worked in the same tactical grammar as bills and glaives, and that psychologically reversed status on a battlefield. For an armored horseman who expected to dominate untrained foot, a hedge of forward-facing scythe blades forcing him to slow, angle, and commit into uncertain gaps was sobering. For a gate guard or farmhand, the same geometry offered a credible way to keep danger at pole's length. The terrifying part, then, is not gore. It is the unglamorous efficiency of a weapon that equalized contests no one expected to be equal, and the material record backs that story. Purpose-built examples in arms collections, documentation from sieges and rebellions, and a visual culture that kept scythemen in public memory long after the pike and the musket had taken over.